Hey everyone, and welcome to today's video. My name is Steven, and this is Above the Table, where we like to talk about how to better run our games. Today we're diving into something chilling, something spooky, how to bring the horror and the Halloween spirit into your games. Whether you want your players to feel the tension creeping up their spines, or have a fun, lighthearted, Halloween-themed session, I'm here to help you craft the perfect atmosphere. So, without further ado, let's get started. First things first, communicate your intentions. When you're planning a horror game, the most important step is communication. Horror games require buy-in from your players more so than a regular game. You need to tell them up front, either during a session 0 for a campaign, or even in just a message or a call before organizing something like a one-shot. This is going to be a horror game, or this will have horror elements. You want your players to know what they're signing up for. This also gets the tension building early. Now there are two main paths you can go with horror in tabletop games. You can lean into the fun and silly side of horror, which gives off the fun classic horror movie vibes. Think Evil Dead or Beetlejuice. Or you can go for a more serious and gritty horror, like psychological thrillers, slashers, or Lovecraftian nightmares. Now we want to build atmosphere. This begins before the game even starts. One of the key elements to running an effective horror game is atmosphere. Think about how you can set the mood in the room. Room decorations can be your friend here. Dim the lights, light some candles, maybe even add some spooky sound effects or music in the background. The subtle details are going to make a difference even before your players sit down to roll dice. We want to think about how we can make our real-world atmosphere match the in-game atmosphere. Is it a haunted mansion? Maybe put up some cobwebs. Are your players lost in a dark forest? A dimly lit room with a cold draft or creepy forest sounds could add that extra layer of immersion. Now that we have some atmosphere, we want to set the scene and allow for build-up. Now let's talk about how to bring that horror into your actual game. One of the hardest things to do in D&D is to genuinely make it scary. And I'll be the first to admit, it's tough. Miniatures aren't scary, dice aren't scary, and things like well-timed sound effects are tricky to get right. But what can make your game terrifying is build-up. Don't rush into the horror. Let your players know something bad is coming, but don't hit them with it right away. The anticipation is often scarier than the threat. You want them to sit on the edge of their seat, knowing something is lurking, but not sure when or how it will strike. And one of the most important things to try to remember when we're trying to set the scene and build atmosphere is to leave some room for the imagination. Some of the scariest moments in horror are the ones that you don't see. What's lying just around the corner? Focus not only on what the players can perceive, but also what they cannot. Foreshadow events to come. It can be incredibly effective to reduce the reliance on maps, artwork, and visual aids. While these elements can be incredibly immersive for many tabletop adventures, horror thrives on ambiguity, what we cannot fully see. The more detailed and the more concrete you make a monster's appearance or a dungeon's layout, the more your players' brains can relax as they categorize things and analyze it. When they know exactly where everything is, they start planning in a tactical way. Losing that sense of dread or disorientation by scaling back on visual aids and instead leaning into pure descriptions and letting the players' imaginations run wild, you can invoke more fear and more paranoia. Here's why this works. Fear of the unknown and not having a precise visual or map keeps players on edge. If you only describe part of a creature or give vague hints about its location, their minds will begin to fill in the blanks. And human imagination is a powerful tool, and often what your players imagine is scarier than anything you could show them. For example, instead of revealing a detailed monster, miniature, or art piece, describe its unsettling movements and the wet squelching sounds as it drags itself across the floor. The unnatural way that its limbs bend in the shadows and the faint glint from its eyes somewhere deep within the dark. But what about our environments? Uncertainty in the environment and using fewer maps or foregoing them entirely can make players feel more unsure of their surroundings. Describing only fragments of their environment, distant sounds, glimpses of shapes or creatures gives a sense of being somewhere hostile. If they don't know how large the room is, where every exit might be, or how far away the danger is, they'll have to make decisions based on instinct and anxiety, rather than precise tactics. Instead of giving them a map of a haunted forest, describe how the trees seem to twist unnaturally in the moonlight, with the shadows moving as if it's alive. Every rustle of the wind sounds like whispers, and the fog seems to cling to their skin. Move away from "you've entered the dark forest, here's your piece of art." Really take the time to think about, if you were walking through this area, why would it unsettle you? This method enhances immersion as they rely on your descriptions to navigate, leaving them more vulnerable to what comes next, and potentially uneasy. Now, for actually introducing horror encounters. When it comes to the monsters themselves, you might want to shift your player's mindset from "how do we kill this thing?" to "how do we survive this thing?" It's just to get out alive and to live to fight another day. You don't want to throw a monster at them that instantly kills a player. That's not fun. That's just frustrating. And it's not even scary. Instead, hint at this creature's power through environmental storytelling. Show dead bodies everywhere, or a powerful NPC that's absolutely terrified of the creature. Maybe have that very creature kill that NPC in front of the players, or easily cast aside something that the party sees as formidable. This continues the process of ramping up the tension, and it really solidifies the danger of this problem. It's also important to remember to balance tension and release. While it's important to maintain a sense of danger, don't keep the tension too high for too long. If you keep pressing your players without letting them breathe, they'll either burn out or get used to the stress. Horror relies on these moments of calm before the storm. Let your players have brief moments of peace, even if the shadow of danger is still there. A perfect example of this is the players relax, they think they've found a safe space to rest, and then maybe horror strikes again. Maybe even invading that very space that they thought was safe. But give them that moment, because that twist, that change of the moment, is going to be all the more impactful when they just took a deep breath and they realized it wasn't safe. Another effective way to dial up the tension in horror-themed games is by keeping the player power level low, making them feel more vulnerable in the face of danger. Horror thrives when the players feel at risk. When players are accustomed to playing powerful adventurers, the sense of danger can fade away as they come to expect that their characters can handle almost any kind of challenge. But when they're weaker, either because they're at a lower level, or playing as children, or similarly vulnerable characters, this can make the stakes feel much higher and the horror a lot more real. Games like Candela Obscura, Call of Cthulhu, and Dread, and many others, handle this concept really well. Playing at low levels, or as normal people, or as children, strips away the safety nets of typical adventurers, forcing players to engage in the story in a more vulnerable and immersive way. With fewer resources and more danger, every decision, every moment feels critical. Another way to strip back that power is negative status effects. These are powerful tools in horror games, and many horror systems employ their own unique forms of these. But what's important is what they do. They strip the players of a certain amount of control and heighten their vulnerability. Effects like fear, exhaustion, corruption, madness, and many more create that sense of growing dread, making characters feel less capable and more exposed. These debilitating conditions amplify the tension, forcing players to adapt and maybe not even use their usual strategies. Negative effects can help deepen the horror, increasing the uncertainty and desperation that a character might feel. But what about more fun and silly Halloween-themed games? Now, not all horror has to be dark and gritty. Sometimes you just want to have a fun, silly Halloween-themed game. And this can be lighthearted, like an 80s horror movie where the monsters are campy and everyone is just having a blast. For a fun horror vibe, throw in classic tropes like vampires, zombies, haunted houses, or malls, while making it clear the danger isn't the main event here. Think Halloween parties, slasher clowns, trick-or-treat quests, or gremlin goblins, or even solving mysteries with a group of wacky characters. Scooby-Doo and Stranger Things comes to mind. This way everyone can get into the spooky spirit without diving into the truly terrifying territory, should that be the way that your party wants to go. This is also a great spot to lean into more themed games, or even a great opportunity to mandate that everyone dresses up in character or just for the fun of it. Now, what kinds of things can we use to develop more inspiration? Sure, we have things like shows, movies, analog horror, and books that can help us think of things like atmosphere and tension. But my truly favorite thing to turn to is audio horror, in the form of things like podcasts. Podcasts like the No Sleep Podcast, Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and many more can be great places to farm for inspiration and new ideas on how to add to our presentation, how we describe things in not only what we say, but how we say it. Your tone, your cadence, all of these things can add to the experience. And I feel podcasts and other forms of direct audio horror and drama are an underrated place to draw inspiration from. Because so much of tabletop games, especially horror-themed games, and the way that we're thinking about it in a more theater of the mind, narrative sense, are just that. It's all audio. It's all spoken presentation. The biggest difference is that your session should be a back and forth conversation with your players. And well, friends, that just about wraps up today's video. Those are the main things that I like to consider when I'm thinking about running a horror game and what kind of things I like to really pay attention to add to it all. I'm curious though, what things do you like to employ when running horror in your games? And what do you do differently? Do you have any favorite systems you like to look to for this? Leave a comment below, letting me know. And let's continue this conversation. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and smack that subscribe button and bell notification and help us hit that big 200 number and join in and follow along for more as we continue to learn how to better run our games. My name is Steven. This has been Above the Table. Thanks guys, and we'll see you on the next one.